Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the Kevin Michael Grace Show. So it's Nick Cannon week here on the KMG Show, which is what the show is actually called. So there have been a host of apologies from Nick Cannon, who is famous for being on TV a lot and on the radio. Endless trash. You couldn't actually link this fellow to anything, really, except he's one of these people who have become ubiquitous on a television. This is from the Daily Mail. Nick Cannon announced he's taking time off from his radio show to commit to reflection and education, but will keep his $70,000 an episode job at The Masked Singer amid pressure at Fox to fire the star over his anti-Semitic podcast. Let's see. In a series of tweets on Thursday, Cannon said that he was taking time off from his nationally syndicated Nick Cannon morning show and will focus on strengthening the bond between Black and Jewish cultures. Well, he's done so much already. I will use this time to establish an action plan towards real, impactful change and advocacy aimed at bringing people together. Just like Megan Mertz, the Duchess of Sussex. I continue to express my gratitude to the rabbis, community leaders, and institutions who have reached out to me to help enlighten me, he added. It comes hours after Cannon issued a public apology to members, again, a serious error in this paragraph in the Mail, to members of the Jewish community after spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and claiming Black people were the true Hebrews. Despite the uproar and calls for the star to be fired from The Masked Singer, Fox confirmed Cannon will continue hosting the singing competition and believed his apology was sincere. Quote, he is clear and remorseful that his words were wrong and lacked both understanding and context and inadvertently promoted hate. This was important for us to observe. Nick has sincerely apologized and has quickly taken steps to educate himself and make amends. On that basis, and given a belief that this moment calls for dialogue, we will move forward with Nick and help him advance this important conversation broadly. Sincerely apologized. To whom? Well, to the Jews. Was there anyone else that Nick Cannon insulted? Made grave accusations against? We'll get to that in a few minutes. Cannon's future at Fox remained uncertain on Wednesday after he was fired from Viacom CBS, a day after making the unsubstantiated claim, often asserted by hate groups, that Jews control the music industry and the media. The 39-year-old had served as the host and executive producer of the reality singing competition since it premiered in January 2019. Fox TV, why are you silent on this? People calling for his head. I guess they only got half his head. The person argued there is no way Cannon should be able to keep his job if Roseanne, who was fired from ABC in 2018, was terminated for a racist tweet. Fox TV, Lionsgate, and the producers of actor Nick Cannon's upcoming daytime talk show are remaining silent about the TV host's recent anti-Semitic tirade, which included comments that Jews control the global banking system, tweeted Jewish philanthropist Adam Milstein. Sources told DailyMail.com he was forced to apologize in order to keep his gig on the show. Until late Wednesday night, Cannon had remained defiant amid the backlash and even demanded his own apology from Viacom CBS, which he accused of trying to silence him and of swindling away, oh dear, his $1 billion Wild 'N Out show. Is Wild 'N Out really worth $1 billion? Yes. Okay. So what about that other apology? Nick Cannon to remain on Fox show. This is from CNN. Two people wrote this, Lisa Respers France and Faith Karimi. They are both Black women, which I'm sure is coincidental. Let's see if there's anything about those other statements that he had made with Professor Griff. No, I'm not seeing it here. Not seeing it. Ryan Saavedra at the Daily Wire. Nick Cannon issues apology for anti-Semitic remarks, does not address racist anti-white remarks. Let's see. He apologized for anti-Semitic remarks that he made during a recent podcast episode, but failed to address racist anti-white remarks that he made during the same episode. In his apology Wednesday evening, like his former employer, Cannon addressed his anti-Semitic remarks, but failed to acknowledge his anti-white comments. And there are, there's a bunch of his apologies here. And yes, again and again, Saavedra. Oh, let's see. Let's go back to what he had to say. When you have a person that has the lack of pigment, the lack of melanin, that they know they will be annihilated, Cannon said. So therefore, however they got the power, they have the lack of compassion. Melanin comes with compassion. Melanin comes with soul. We call it soul. Soul brothers and sisters. That's the melanin that connects us. So the people that don't have it, and I'm going to say this carefully, are a little less. When they didn't have the power of the sun then started to deteriorate them. So then they're acting out of fear. They're acting out of low self-esteem. They're acting out of a deficiency. So therefore, the only way that they can act is evil. They have to rob, steal, rape, kill in order to survive. They had to be savages. They had to be barbaric because they're in these Nordic mountains. They're in these rough environments, so they're acting as animals. So they're the ones that are actually closer to animals. They're the ones that are actually the true savages. Pretty hard-hitting stuff from Nick Cannon, wouldn't you say? Pretty close to eliminationist language. Well, let's go to the horse's mouth and read from his Twitter feed. Their input and friendship will help me as I further commit myself to more profound learning and towards strengthening the bond between the Black and Jewish cultures every day going forward. I continue to express my gratitude to the rabbis, community leaders, and institutions who have reached out to help enlighten me. I will use this time to establish an action plan towards real impactful change and advocacy aimed at bringing people together, not white people and Black people, apparently. Morning radio family, I've decided to take some time away from my radio show so I can commit myself to deeper, more thorough reflection and education. Well, what does acclaimed Black scholar W. Camus Bell have to say about this? Well, according to the authoritative TMZ, Bell says Cannon's anti-Semitic comments were wrong, full stop, but he has a theory about how Nick got himself into this bigoted mess. The United Shades of America host told us he thinks Nick wanted to show that he supports the Black community no matter what. So he leaned in to defend Professor Griff and repeat some of Minister Farrakhan's preachings. Kamau joined on TMZ Live Thursday when he suggested Nick can still be a strong voice for African Americans, but it should be done without promoting divisive and anti-Semitic ideas. Kamau Show returns to CNN on Sunday night for its 5th season, and he'll be taking a hard look at anti-Semitism and white supremacy in all its forms on the premiere episode. That got us talking about all the violence between citizens, police brutality, and general contentiousness across the country. In his eyes, it's pretty clear America is on the brink of a historic turning of the tide, and not in a good way. Watch how he breaks it down, but when you're using Roman Empire analogies, you know, it's pretty dire. Okay. Round 1 of this is over, or round 2 of this is over, and anti-Semitism, unacceptable. Anti-white hatred, perfectly acceptable. Perfectly acceptable. Neither Fox nor CBS Viacom really cares about saying that whites are animals, savage, that they need to kill and steal because they're jealous of black people, etc., etc., etc. An interesting piece from Michael Harriot in The Root, which has the motto, "The blacker the content, the sweeter the truth." Intercom giant, Viacom CBS fired television host, comedian, and former Atlanta AT&T percussionist, Nick Cannon, on Tuesday for making comments many classified as derogatory, racist, and anti-Semitic on his podcast, Cannon's Class. Cannon's show Wild and Out was on its 15th season on Viacom-owned MTV before the white-owned media conglomerate abruptly pulled it off the air. Oh, it's white-owned, is it? Cannon's comments included elements from Jacob's history. Yeah, this is real, by the way. It's not made up. The insane theory that white people were created 6,000 years ago by an evil cave-dwelling scientist. According to this alternative version of history endorsed by the Nation of Islam, this, quote, genetically engineered tribe of white-skinned albinos evolved into a behaviorally aggressive race of rulers, namely the Caucasians, who then spread into every corner of the world, unquote. He interpolated this with the writings of Dr. Francis Cress Welding's 1974 essay, The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, which theorized that racial intolerance exists because of whites' deep-seated jealousy of people with melanin, which causes white people to embrace white supremacy. While this canon is as stupid as the theories that produce the mainstream scientifically accepted beliefs that black people are more violent and sexually promiscuous, Cannon's regurgitation of these hypotheses made a lot of white people mad. Black Twitter, however, had a different reaction. You see, it's interesting that we have to go to the root to get a consideration of the white aspect of this. Because the mainstream media's attitude is, oh, let's just talk about Jews. They're very upset. White people, well, perhaps they deserve to be upset. You know, because America is, after all, a hotbed of systemic racism. And I suppose, Jewish people are oppressed as well? I don't know. Black Twitter. Let's see. Yeah, they're very upset. White Twitter. So when are we canceling Nick Cannon? It took 30 years, a 6-part documentary, and 3 trials to get R. Kelly canceled. Y'all think we're about to cancel Nick Cannon for telling the truth? Were black people being hypocritical? Does this prove the black community is anti-Semitic? Does this mean we had to buy tickets to the 85 South show to see Carlos Miller, Bato Chico Bean? What would happen to Loose Legs? Why weren't black people upset about Cannon's racism? Well, while many accused Mariah's ex of being racist and anti-Semitic, Cannon explained that while he may have the extra bone that helps black people run faster, yes, that is an actual thing some white people believe, he doesn't have a racist bone in his body. I, however, think Nick Cannon is an MFing genius. Yes, Nick Cannon's words were bigoted. Yes, I understand why people are infuriated by what he said. Yes, I believe Viacom has the right to fire him for bringing a negative spotlight on their company. But I'm elated that Nick Cannon said what he said because Nick Cannon is America. First, check my resume before we embark upon this argument, and I'm accused of conveniently changing my stance on this subject because I like Nick Cannon. You will see that I've previously expressed 4 beliefs. I don't care if white people are racists. Racism is different from white supremacy. Black people can be racist. Ooh, daring. Anyone who remains silent about racism is a racist and a coward. For years, I've tried to find an apt analogy to illustrate these concepts. I've used childhood stories, actual history, and fictional medical diagnoses to explain how white supremacy works. But it wasn't until Nick Cannon stepped on this proverbial landmine of black supremacy that I found the perfect metaphor for the difference between systemic racism and individual hate. Check America's resume. America has been racist for a long time. The Constitution, the Scholastic Aptitude Test, what? And the phrase, what about black on black crime, all have roots and premises analogous to Cannon's outrageous claims. There are many others, including Charles Darwin, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Representative Steve King, Tucker Carlson, and every third guest on Joe Rogan's podcast who espouse similar theories. Yeah. Let's see. Stephen Miller, Jeff Sessions, Sebastian Gorka all believe in the white supremacist versions of Jakub's theory. Yeah, we're really getting into the weeds here. We are really getting into the weeds. That if one wants to examine Black views about Jews or Black views about white supremacy or racism, it's very, very complicated. Michael Harriot describes himself as a world-renowned white peopleologist. Yeah, the last real negus alive. One would ask why a really talentless man like Nick Cannon was given this, that, and the other for so long if America is a white supremacist society. Why media, business have been telling us for decades that essentially Black people are better, smarter, I don't know, happier, more soulful, more joyful, et cetera, than white people. But we know that we're being gaslighted. Let's go to the chat. Is the end of liberty the same as the end of liberalism? I'll get to that a little later. Tweety Bird says, Nick Bra, stop helping white people. Looking good, Emperor Palpatine. Is that a reference to me? All right, I'll take it. The remorse about money lost is acute, says Walrus Walbertarian. That's an interesting, brings up an interesting thought. What if Nick Cannon had simply decided to go with the Black audience? That he'd taken Diddy's offer? That I suppose, you know, again, losing Viacom CBS is one thing, but losing the Fox is quite another. William Hicks, what, no quality time with family? That is my favorite excuse. Nick Cannon needs to step it up. Cliche-wise, Cannon is pretty lame. I don't know. Jonathan Paul says, sincere, come on, nobody believes it had anything to do with anything other than raw power. I don't know whether that's actually true. Because when these Black Israelites talk about themselves being the real Jews, the real Israelites, they actually mean it. And then they, you know, when they talk about the Jews supposedly having stolen their identity, they present this in the matter of facts, which are understood by all intelligent people, all intelligent and well-informed people. And there is a certain degree, I would say a great deal of genuine surprise that when, you know, Professor Griff talks about the Ashkenazi Jews being the Ashkenazis, he actually said something to the effect of that, well, everybody knows this, right? When, again, as I've said, there's no point in arguing with these people. None. Zero. Dr. Paul says the golem should go after Dr. Frankenstein and leave us villagers alone. Chogokin666 says known for modesty also. I don't know. I suppose Nick Cannon rather reminds me of Joe Rogan, but he makes Joe Rogan seem like a scholar. Chad Chadson, what was he canceled from? He was canceled from all of his connections with Viacom CBS. That means MTV, I suppose, in particular. Mont D. Law says, I think his theory is just about as reasonable as TDS on race. I suppose so, you know, but this idea that Black people are jealous, white people are jealous of Black people because of lack of melanin, that doesn't really explain why people around the world, including Black people, use various means to lighten their skin, or why someone, Beyonce, takes a great pains to have, you know, long, flowing, blonde mane of hair, which, of course, is not natural to Black women. Glib Medley says Nick Cannon should go bass fishing with Tucker. Maybe that might be amusing. I'll just say, well, actually, Tucker said that he was fishing for trout. Tweety Bird says Cannon must have one drop of white blood, hence his lack of empathy. Yakub, that is just, if you go to like Google image search, you can find like a GIF of the throbbing head of Yakub. That's how much of an evil mastermind is. That his big white evil brain is actually throbbing, and you can see it through his skull. Mike F. Obama on civil rights movement talks about the Moses generation and the Joshua generation. Okay. Visionary Companion says, has anyone listened to Dick Gregory? He was a case study in clinically paranoid free associative psychosis. Monty Law says, I don't understand why black ladies have to have white lady hair. I suppose there's that, synthesis, right? Kind of a Hegelian synthesis going on there. What's happening in cancel culture? This is from Jonathan Turley's blog. New York professor faces latest termination petition after allegedly falling asleep during anti-racism meeting. Well, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? For many professors, the story out of New York may seem like an academic sequel to the 1982 horror film Don't Go to Sleep. Students are seeking the termination of Marymount Manhattan Theater Arts Associate Professor Patricia Simon, sounds Jewish to me, after she appeared to briefly fall asleep during an anti-racist meeting on Zoom. Simon denies the allegations, but Marymount Manhattan student Caitlin Gagnon started a petition which features this picture. And it's a picture of her with her hand. She's like this. Could be asleep. Best to see the video. She may have just been closing her eyes, which people do regularly. Let's see. The petition accuses her of ignoring racist and sizist actions and words of the vocal coaches under her jurisdiction. 2,000 signatories. It is an ironic twist on the woke movement where literally not being awake is now cause to be terminated. Simon insists that the picture was a false image due to her bifocals and how she changed her angle to rest her eyes. I was not asleep, as is implied at any point during the meeting. She said the photo used was taken without permission when I was looking down or briefly resting my Zoom-weary eyes with my head tilted back, which I must do in order to see my computer screen through my trifocal progressive lenses. I listened with my ears and heart the entire meeting. Well, I guess she's desperately trying to keep her job. Marymount Manhattan College, according to Wikipedia, is a private liberal arts college in New York City on the Upper East Side. 2,069 undergraduates, with women making up 75% and men 25%. Sorry about that. It was founded in 1936 by the religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. Yeah, I'm getting the impression that it is no longer a religious institution. While the college no longer describes itself as Catholic, the Catholic Church continued to list it in the Catholic Directory until 2005. It sounds like the typical New York liberal madhouse now. It is certainly true to have such false light images. We previously discussed how President Obama was unfairly accused of inappropriate conduct through such false light publications. He was accused of checking out a female staffer with the use of a single photo. However, the full records show that Obama was moving his head to speak with another world leader at a photo op, and the frame just caught him at a misleading angle as the staffer walked by. However, even if true, why is a professor dozing off in a meeting now a matter for termination? Faculty meetings are a well-known cure for insomnia, even when you care deeply about the subject. I've seen colleagues virtually cause self-concussions by sleep-induced head bobbing. Even vice presidents and United States senators have been accused of falling asleep in the middle of a meeting in the Oval Office. A senator appeared to fall asleep during the presidential impeachment Indeed, during a judicial impeachment, I was lead counsel arguing on the Senate floor. My family came to the floor to watch my closing argument, and my youngest matey fell asleep in my wife's arms. The point is that Professor Simon denies the allegation, but even if true, the first response of these students is to seek yet another termination of a professor. Simon is accused of being known to use her power to intimidate and bully the students in her program who've made efforts to advocate for themselves or for their fellow peers. This is unrelated to the alleged dozing depravity caught on Zoom and virtually impossible to refute, even in the absence of any specific incident. Students later added that she is fat-phobic and rejected her claim that I listened with my eyes and heart. Academic cannot function in an environment where even dozing off in a meeting is evidence of racism. We should all engage in this national debate while retaining a modicum of fairness and toleration. Too late. Too late, Jonathan Turley. Far too late for that. This sort of thing has been going on for, 30 years or more? And it's not like this ship is going to be turned around very quickly. Let's just start defunding these institutions or make student loans dischargeable in bankruptcy. That would be a good start. That would be a good start indeed. There's a lot of talk about the dysfunction of Black cities. Who is to blame? Of course, Blacks blame it on white supremacy and the legacy of slavery, and the legacy of Jim Crow and redlining. That one always gets dragged up. But no one seems to consider the possibility that the government they get is the government that they want. I was reading about Atlantic City, and this is from the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's from last year. Atlantic City gets a new mayor after another one is disgraced. Will it matter? By Amy Rosenberg. A day after Atlantic City lost another mayor to the criminal justice system, it placed a new bet on a familiar player, City Council President Marty Small Jr., who was sworn in as acting mayor to replace Frank M. Gilliam. With the 7th floor mayor's office already cleared out, the Frank Gilliam sign nowhere in sight, Small 45 fulfilled a lifelong ambition and was officially sworn in out of the public eye shortly after Friday, with noted criminal defense attorney Ed Jacobs during the honors. Jacobs successfully defended Small against campaign fraud charges, most recently in 2011. No crying. Someone called out as a packed city council chamber applauded Small's first public appearance as mayor, which had been billed as his swearing in. It began with him asking people to keep Gilliam, who pleaded guilty Thursday in federal court to embezzling $87,000 from a youth football club, and his family in their prayers. Things haven't come easy, Small said, his voice breaking slightly as he continued. Just know one thing, my heart is for this city. My heart is for the people. This is a responsibility I take very seriously, and I'm going to give you my all. Small, an Atlantic City native and voracious Eagles fan. That's not what voracious means. Had sought the top elected job in Atlantic City for years. He lost to Gilliam in the 2017 Democratic primary race by a slim margin in a race that saw some of the state's top power brokers and unions bankrolling Gilliam. Small's wife, Laquetta, an educator, was recently named principal of Atlantic City High School. They have 2 children, Jada, 11, and Marty Jr., 9. Shouldn't that be Marty the third? Oh, okay. All right. I'm a little confused there. The city remains under a legislative takeover that gives the state absolute power over operations, personnel, and assets. But under the administration of Governor Phil Murphy, the state has wielded that power less heavily than was done under Governor Chris Christie. In some ways, Small has a lot in common with Gilliam. Both are products of the Atlantic City High School basketball network and the intense local political scene that has dominated elected office, especially at the council level. Small is no stranger to the attention of prosecutors and Atlantic City politicians. He was charged twice and acquitted twice with election-related fraud. He has maintained those cases were politically motivated. Okay, so what else do we know about Atlantic City? Well, we know that deep-seated racial bias, again from the Inquirer, Atlantic City officials blast effort to change form of government. And this was before Marty Small became mayor. He called a newly announced effort to change the form of city government an ongoing attempt to humiliate the people of Atlantic City, one that represents a deep-seated racial bias and animus that reflects a mindset that believes African Americans and other races can't govern. Well, obviously they can govern. The question is how well they do. And incidents like this, they don't help. This is from AC Primetime. Rising opposition to, from a year ago, rising opposition to Atlantic City school move involving Principal Small. Well, Atlantic City Councilman Marty Small's wife, Laquetta Small, apparently she styles herself Dr. Small, principal of Pennsylvania Avenue School, soon become principal of AC High School. This letter was sent to Vice President Constance Days Chapman of the Atlantic City Board of Education by Bert Lopez of the Hispanic Association of Atlantic County. We are the Hispanic Association of Atlantic County, a new nonprofit community organization dedicated to empowering, advocating, and advancing the Hispanic community in the Atlantic County region while preserving our beautiful cultural heritage. We write to you in regard to one of the most impactful and important members of our beloved community, Atlantic City High School Principal Lena Gill. She is a well-qualified, effective high school principal who has dedicated the last 20 years to the youth of Atlantic City. However, it has come to our attention that the superintendent of Atlantic City Schools, Barry Caldwell, has notified Principal Gill that she will be transferred away from AC to Pennsylvania Avenue School with no specific reason justifying the transfer. It is also our understanding that Superintendent Caldwell has made it clear that in her place, Dr. Laquetta Small will be taking over as principal of Atlantic City High School. So why is this transfer occurring? Our fear is that it seems to be politically motivated and an attempt to allow the wife of the Atlantic City Council president to move up and become the new principal of AC High School. So, an intersectional melee in Atlantic City. Dr. Laquetta did become the principal of AC High School, and her husband is now the mayor of Atlantic City, and the Hispanics are not very happy about. This points to a problem that Black power in the United States has, is that the percentage of Blacks as the population of the United States has remained steady at around 13% for decades now, whereas the Hispanics have seemingly come out of nowhere to actually become more populous than Blacks in the United States. And meanwhile, you have increasingly large numbers of Chinese, Sikhs, Hindus, etc., etc. And these people do not share the white people's guilt over Black people. They regard this simply in terms of political power and wealth. This is from the Daily Mail, Sebastian Shakespeare. He is Britain's most powerful and influential Black journalist, but Vogue editor Edward Enninful has revealed that he was a victim of racial profiling at his own office. Enninful was refused entry to Vogue House in Mayfair by a security guard who apparently failed to recognize him. To add insult to injury, the guard told Enninful to use the tradesman's entrance at the rear of the building. Today, I was racially profiled by a security guard whilst entering my workplace. As I entered, I was instructed to use the loading bay. Just because our timelines and weekends are returning to normal, we cannot let the world return to how it was. Change needs to happen now. And I'm looking at a picture of this guy, and I'm just going to have to keep my mouth shut. He later confirmed that the security guard was immediately sacked by bosses at Condé Nast, the magazine giant which owns Vogue. Condé Nast moved quickly to dismiss the security guard, but it just goes to show that sometimes it doesn't matter what you've achieved in the course of your life. The first thing that some people will judge you on is the color of your skin. NFL 48, who was born in Ghana but grew up in West London, became the first non-white person to appointed editor of Vogue in 2017 after succeeding the long-serving Alexandra Shulman. Are you noticing a pattern here? He reportedly told friends that his priority was to, quote, get rid of the posh girls, unquote. His arrival at the magazine prompted a mass exodus of staff, including Baronet's daughter and deputy editor Emily Sheffield, who is Samantha Cameron's sister. Famous friends are shocked by his experience with the security guard. Supermodel Naomi Campbell. We still quoting Naomi Campbell? Because I think that very soon from now, a whole bunch of people in journalism who've been sucking up to Naomi Campbell for decades, they're going to be singing a different tune. Anyway, the supermodel, who hasn't been a supermodel for decades, demanded, when will this change? Been happening in UK for so long. So sorry you had to go through that. Actress Gemma Chan commented, there's so much more to do. Sorry this happened to you. Television presenter Trisha Goddard told him, I was once mistaken for the tea lady, but this is mad. Well, why is it mad? I recall there's an episode in the first season of the Larry Sanders Show where Larry is coming into his recording studio and he doesn't have his ID. And there is a new security guard, a tall white guy named Rick. And Rick says, no, I can't let you in. And then an older, more senior security guard says, well, what's the problem here? Well, come on right in. He said, I forgot my ID. Come on in, Mr. Sanders. Don't you know this is Mr. Sanders? Well, I'm sorry. And the security guard gets sacked. Now, this gets revealed when Larry is doing one of many interviews, including to The Advocate, to show what a warm, caring person he is. And when the reporter hears about this, Larry panics and says, no, we don't. No, I'm not firing him. No, he has to be rehired immediately. Why would that be? Because Larry does not want to come across as being a rich creep. Whereas the editor of Vogue is perfectly happy to come across as being a rich creep and to grind it in the face of some working class fellow. It's his country now. It's Edward Annifield's country now. Things are moving very fast on the statue front. And there are so many stories that have happened this year that once again, come on, this is made up, right? This is from BBC News, but it's not April the 1st. Is there some other day where made up stories, well, actually every day made up stories appear in the BBC and the Guardian and the Independent and all manner of news media. In any event, a statue of a Black Lives Matter protester has been removed from the plinth where a statue of slave trader Edward Colston once stood. The sculpture of Jen Reed was erected on Wednesday, but removed by Bristol City Council just over 24 hours later. Ms. Reed had been photographed standing on the empty plinth after the Colston statue was pulled down during protests. Mayor Marvin Rees said that it was up to the people of Bristol to decide what would replace Colston's statue. Bristol City Council contractors removed the sculpture of Ms. Reed and took it away in the back of a lorry on Thursday. The black resin statue of Ms. Reed, called A Surge of Power, was created by artist Mark Quinn and designed to be a temporary installation to continue the conversation about racism. He said he was inspired to create it after seeing an image of her standing on the plinth with her fist raised during the Black Lives Matter protest on the 7th of June. Ms. Reed said she had an overwhelming impulse to climb onto the plinth during last month's protest, and the sculpture is about me making a stand for my mother, for my daughter, for Black people like me. Okay, so much of Britain's wealth was based on the slave trade, and Bristol was the heart of the British slave trade. Which raises the question, why did all these people from the Caribbean flock to Britain in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s? if Britain was such a vile, vile place. Well, I guess it was a better place than wherever they came from, but now it must be destroyed because of grievances from the past. Never mind that the BBC bends over backwards to do whatever it can for Black people and to instruct the majority of the British population how wicked they are and how Britain has always been wicked. But this hatred, it goes both ways. This is from Breitbart. New York Times, Nicole Hannah-Jones, a.k.a. Ida Bay Wells, confirms she called Europeans barbaric devils and linked Africa to Aztec temples. Let's see. Nicole Hannah-Jones, the New York Times reporter, famous for her work, for which she received a Pulitzer, on the Paper 1619 project, confirmed Wednesday that she wrote a 1995 letter labeling white people as bloodsuckers and barbaric devils, with a caveat that she does not hate them. Hannah-Jones admitted that she wrote a letter to the editor in Notre Dame's student newspaper, The Observer, while accusing columnist Andrew Sullivan of attempting to cancel her by sharing a Federalist article that first unveiled the incendiary writing. Andrew Sullivan tried to use a letter to the editor I wrote when I was 19 to get me canceled, Hannah-Jones said on Twitter. He has attacked and trolled every prominent Black writer and quit his job only because he has a new gig. White people getting Black people canceled, that is not allowed. That is not allowed. Now, Jewish people getting Black people canceled, that's allowed. Learn the rules, Ida Bay Wells. One would have thought you would be more on top of this than you are. The white race is the biggest murderer, rapist, pillager, and thief of the modern world. In case you didn't grasp the meaning of the 1619 project, Andrew Sullivan tweeted while linking to this Federalist column about Ida Bay Wells. The letter to the editor I wrote when I was 19, by the way. Oh, you see, teenagers never get canceled. Huh? That never happens? Or adults don't get canceled for things that they wrote when they were teenagers? Or how about, let me look this up. The case of Derek Daly's son. Derek Daly was an Irish race car driver who later became a commentator on open wheel racing. And his son became a race car driver as well. Connor became a race car driver. In 2018, Derek Daly was fired from a racing analyst position he had at Wish TV because of a racial slur he had made 35 years before. During the outrage aftermath, his son Connor was set to make his NASCAR debut at Road America on August 25, 2018, before his sponsor, Lilly Diabetes, pulled out due to the comments, even though Connor was not born for another 8 years after the fact. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm not going to feel any pity for Ida Bay Wells. Yeah, let's see. According to Fox News, the Derek Daly controversy started when radio play-by-play announcer Bob Lamey recalled an interview in which a well-known racing driver was asked if he thought anyone was holding back during qualifying, to which he allegedly answered, "There aren't any N-words in this race." Oh, I see. Allegedly said this. Oh, okay. It soon became apparent that the Indianapolis-based driver in question was Irishman Derek Daly. Lamey also stepped down from his radio position amid the scandal and issued a public apology. I've interviewed Derek Daly. Very likable fellow, I must say, but that could be ethnic bias talking. Anyway, Ida Bay Wells defends herself by saying the letter to the editor I wrote when I was 19, by the way, was in response to this screed written against my indigenous friends, of which I'm sure she has many, who were protesting a Columbus mural. I tried to match the tone to make a point. Of course, he had no interest in context or truth, and this is all so rich. Sullivan responded, "This is an outright lie about cancellation. I've never done any such thing. Briefly noting someone's past views is not trying to cancel them. I would hate to cancel you. It means I couldn't criticize your work. No fun." The Federalist Jordan Davidson identified the author of that letter, signed Nicole Hanna, as Hannah Jones. Wow, how many names does this woman have? Almost as many as Diddy, it would seem. On June 25th, the day of the Federalist report, Breitbart News asked the Times whether it could confirm the reporting was correct, giving the variant spelling of Hannah Jones' first name. The email was never answered. The letter's author, that would be Ida Bay Wells, compares Christopher Columbus to Adolf Hitler, going as far as saying that there's no difference between the two before launching into an unproven, yes, unproven, that's the word I would use, speculations about African explorers reaching the Americas before Columbus and somehow being involved with the construction of the Aztec temples. Now, wait a minute here. If I remember my Eric von Daniken, who was very popular, in the 60s and 70s, could this mean that black people are the gods from outer space who created the pyramids? That is definitely something to consider. In any event, Ida Bay Wells wrote, Christopher Columbus and those like him were not different than Hitler. The crimes they committed were unnecessarily cruel and can only be described as acts of the devil. Africans had been to the Americas long before Columbus or any Europeans. The difference is that Africans had the decency and respect for human life to learn from the Native Americans and trade technology with them. This is Wakanda before Wakanda. The pyramids of the Aztecs and the great stone heads of the Olmecs are lasting monuments to the friendship of those two people. In contrast, the letter states White's lasting monument was the destruction and enslavement of two races of people, that is to say, Native Americans and Africans. Well, both Native Americans and Africans were slaving up a storm for hundreds, thousands of years. The letter then claims that modern white people, the descendants of these savage people, similarly sabotage black communities. They pump drugs and guns into the black community, pack black people into the squalor of segregated urban ghettos, and continue to be bloodsuckers in our community. She said, in conclusion, that white people feel a need to constantly prove their superiority. But after everything that those barbaric devils did, I did not hate them. I understand that because of some lacking, they needed to constantly prove their superiority. I guess, this brings up a question of accomplishment, but as we know from my own study of, black history or historiography, that everything significant in civilization was actually created by black people and was then later stolen by white people. Just in case you were wondering. And in the Ha Bloody Ha section, protests turned violent on Lower Manhattan on Wednesday and left nearly 40 people arrested and one of the NYPD's top cops covered in blood. Police intended to keep two groups of protesters separate, but when pro-police marchers got to the Manhattan side of the Brooklyn Bridge, they met up with anti-police protesters occupying City Hall, and chaos broke out around 10 a.m. Yes, I'm looking at the picture of thousands of people here who are not observing social distancing requirements. I wonder if Bill de Blasio and the LoveGov dishing it 24/7 are going to arrest these people. But no, de Blasio has already made it clear that there's an exception for Black Lives Matters protests. Protesters at the defund the police encampment clashed with police, and at least 7 NYPD officers suffered injuries. Monahan suffered a hand injury, a lieutenant was struck in the head, a sergeant was struck in the head, and a lieutenant suffered an eye socket fracture. They literally arrested about 20 of our folks as this protest stopped. We're going to arrest Black Lives Matters protesters and then allow this protest to peacefully come by, said Jonathan Likes, Black Youth Project 100. They didn't want a counter-protest. They didn't want democracy. They didn't want freedom in this moment. Shaborn Banks, 25, is accused of punching a lieutenant and leaving him with a fractured eye socket. And 25-year-old Quran, spelled like the Quran, Q-U-R-A. And Campbell is charged with assaulting 3 officers on the bridge. So what do we know? Where have we come across the name Terrence Monahan before? He publicly took a knee with the anti-police left last month. Sorab Al-Mari of the New York Post reminds us. Again, ha, bloody ha. Now, focus is on black leaders across America, particularly black leaders. Oh, black mayors, black governors, fat women with a gap in their teeth who lost the governorship but insist they're the real governor, J.C. Abrams. This is very amusing. This is, again, from Breitbart, Pam Key. Wednesday on MSNBC, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, and I cannot stop laughing at that name. Yes, okay, your father was soul singer Major Lance, but Lance Bottoms? Come on, lady. You didn't notice that? Said President Donald Trump and Republicans would lose the state of Georgia in the November election. Anchor Nicole Wallace, yeah, she was a political hack for Conservatism, Inc., and I guess there's no more work in that anymore. So now she's an anchor at MSNBC. You've been at the center of everything pull at the country, but how is your city doing? How are you doing? And does Donald Trump's presence in the state help or hurt on any of these fronts? She said, we're still standing. I am, for the first time, glad to see Donald Trump in Georgia because I think that his recognition and acknowledgement that Georgia is in play. Joe Biden is polling so well in this state. This is a battleground state. If you look at where Donald Trump is giving his energy, it's to states that the Republicans are concerned about losing. But he's also giving a lot of attention to women leaders across this country, including myself, Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, Jenny Durkin in Seattle. I'm not sure what that is all about, but I find it most interesting. I think this speaks to how concerned the Republicans are that they will lose Georgia, and they should be concerned because they will. Well, it was about a week ago that Mayor Bottoms announced that the autonomous zone in Atlanta, which was kind of a religious shrine, which had been cordoned off around a Wendy's that had been burned down. And she said, okay, I'm not going to allow the autonomous zone. And why was that? Well, because a car driven by a black woman, which contained another black woman and first black woman's 8-year-old daughter, the keepers of the shrine to the fellow who was arrested for being drunk unconscious in his car and blocking the drive-through lane in Denny's. So a pistol was emptied into the car, killing the 8-year-old daughter. That's just how fine Atlanta is doing. Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, she's doing even better because Chicago is, no one's going to catch Chicago in the murder sweepstakes. And Jenny Durkin, of course, presided over the Chop Chaz. And there is a serious movement by the left, led by an Indian-born socialist, to remove her. Meanwhile, Jenny is all out against this Indian-born socialist because the Indian brought a howling mob to Jenny Durkin's house. So, yeah, I guess they're doing fine. But where's the good news? Where's the light amongst all of the darkness? Okay, well, the Washington Post yesterday has some good news, at least for rentiers, for rent seekers. American companies cut back sharply on hiring for jobs related to diversity and inclusion when the coronavirus pandemic struck in mid-March, with openings falling twice as fast as for other listings, according to data from one of the country's biggest career sites. Postings for job titles such as Chief Diversity Officer, Diversity and Inclusion Recruiter, and D&I Program Manager fell nearly 60% between early March and early June, according to the career site Glassdoor, which plans to publish the report Wednesday. That's a sharper drop than for overall human resources jobs, which fell 49%, or job openings overall, which fell 28%. It's almost as if in the midst of an economic crisis, the businesses across the United States were forced to, decide which jobs were actually important and which jobs were not important, and to cull the non-important jobs. But as of course we know, diversity and inclusion are the most important things. They're far more important than efficiency or profits. And the Times reports, but as corporate America offered new commitments to work for inclusion amid the national reckoning, again with the reckoning, on racial justice that erupted after the killing of George Floyd in police custody, the same category of job openings rebounded. D&I postings rose 50% in June. In June on Glassdoor, yay! The largest percentage increase over a 4-week period since January 16, though they are still well below their March peak. Still mountains to climb. All righty. The Atlantic from yesterday. A second coronavirus death surge is coming. You can do it, Second Spike. You can do it. Come on, Orange Bad Man. He's got to be taken out by any means necessary. And coronavirus, again, it's a savage god of the left. There was always a logical explanation for why cases rose through the end of June, while deaths did not. This is from the amusingly named Alexis C. Madrigal. It's the C in the middle that is so amusing. Why is it necessary? Are there a lot of people called Alexis Madrigal? There's no mystery in the number of Americans dying from COVID-19, despite political leaders trivializing the pandemic. Who is trivializing it? Who? Deaths are rising again. The 7-day average for deaths per day has now jumped by more than 200 since July the 6th, according to data compiled by the COVID Tracking Project at The Atlantic. By our count, states reported 855 deaths today, in line with the recent elevated numbers in mid-July. Yes, there's an illusion here, which is that deaths are frequently not reported to central authorities until weeks after they happen. Now, let's see, who is this Alexis C. Madrigal? Is a staff writer at The Atlantic and is the author of Powering the Dream, The History and Promise of Green Technology. Well, I wonder if Alexis C. Madrigal knows of this reporting gap and just decided to ignore it because it's scarier that way. COVID-19, Phase 1 of the Permanent Crisis is an essay by Mike Whitney at UNS.com. And as I've said many times, the reaction to COVID-19, or the blind hysterical panic, proves that all this talk, liberty, freedom, how much we love them, how they will never take away our freedom, it's all nonsense. You see how easy it was? You see how easy it was? Oh, we have an emergency. Oh, we have a respiratory illness. Well, we've had respiratory illnesses in the past. This is a novel coronavirus. That means new. Oh, it's new. Well, what does the World Health Organization say? Oh, they say it's nothing to worry about. The real problem is racism. But yeah, we changed our mind about that. And this is the greatest crisis that America has faced since ever, really, ever. Mike Whitney writes, let's assume that the events of the last 5 months are neither random nor unexpected. Let's say they're part of an ingenious plan to transform American democracy into a lockdown police state controlled by criminal elites and their puppet governors. And let's say the media's role is to fan the flames of mass hysteria by sensationalizing every gory detail, every ominous prediction, and every slightest uptick in the death toll in order to exert greater control over the population. And let's say the media used their power to craft a message of terror they'd repeat over and over again until finally there was just one frightening storyline ringing out from every soapbox and bullhorn. One group of governors from the same political party implementing the same destructive policies, and one small group of infectious disease experts, all incestuously related, issuing edicts in the form of professional advice. Could such a thing happen in America? What's most astonishing about the COVID-19 operation is the manner in which the elected government was circumvented by public health experts connected to a power-mad billionaire activist. That was a stroke of genius. Most people regard the United States as a fairly stable democracy, and yet The first sign of infection triggered the rapid transfer of power from the president to unelected professionals whose conflicts of interest are too vast to list. Equally fascinating is the fact that the lockdowns were not the brainchild of Donald Trump, but the mainly Democrat governors who shrugged off any constitutional limits to their power and arbitrarily ordered people to stay in their homes, wear masks, and avoid close physical contact with other humans. All of this was done in the name of science and condoned under emergency powers, despite the fact that mass quarantines of healthy people have no historical precedent or scientific basis. No matter. This was never about science or logic anyway, and it certainly wasn't about saving lives. It was always about power, pure, unalloyed political power. The power to push the economy into free fall, destroying millions of jobs and businesses. The power to bail out Wall Street while diverting attention to a fairly mild infection that kills roughly 1 in every 500 people. The power to create a permanent underclass willing to work for table scraps or less. And the power to fundamentally restructure human relations so that normal intimacies like handshakes, hugs, or social gatherings are entirely banned. This, of course, was the most ambitious part of the project, the basic changes to human interaction that date back thousands of years, and which are now seen as an obstacle to a new order in which the individual must be isolated, desensitized, and kept in a constant state of fear to be more easily controlled and manipulated. On top of that, all of this is taking place in plain sight, where anyone with even minimal critical thinking skills should be able to see what is happening, but very few do. Why is that? Fear. Fear has gripped the population as preventing typically intelligent, perceptive people from seeing something that's right under their noses. Check out this clip from an article entitled, "When Will the Madness End?" What's happening now is a spread of this serious medical condition to the whole population. The public is adopting a personality disorder, paranoid delusions, and irrational fear. It can happen with anything, but here we see a primal fear of disease turning into a mass panic. Once fear reaches a certain threshold, normalcy, rationality, morality, and decency fade and are replaced by shocking stupidity and cruelty. We're not saying that COVID doesn't kill people, but let's put this into perspective. The number of people under the age of 55 who have been killed by COVID is 9,000 people. And the United States has a population of 330 million people. About 2.8 million people die every year in the United States. What we're saying is that scheming elites and their allies in the media and politics see every crisis as an opportunity to advance their own authoritarian agenda. In fact, the restructuring of basic democratic institutions can only take place within the confines of a major crisis. That's why the CIA, the giant corporations, the WHO, and the Gates posse gathered for meetings that anticipated an event, just like the COVID outbreak. They needed a crisis of that magnitude to achieve their ultimate objective, total control. That's what they mean when they say there will be no return to normal. They mean they're replacing representative government with a new totalitarian model in which the levers of state power will be controlled by them. So while the virus outbreak might be coincidental, the management of the crisis certainly is not. Our species has withstood myriad epidemics in the past without resorting to the extremist measures we have taken during this latest outbreak. Take the state of Oregon, for example, whose Democratic Governor Kate Brown just signed another executive order extending a state of emergency through September 4th. I'm just going to break in here to say Kate Brown, of course, was not born or raised in the state of Oregon. She managed to sashay over there when she was about 25 years old. So all of her formative experiences did not take place in the state of Oregon. I believe she is described as America's first bisexual governor. And there's a state of anarchy on the streets of Portland, which has been going on for weeks and arguably months. But that's not worth a state of emergency. In any event, Governor Brown's move comes months after the peak in deaths was reached in mid-April. As of Tuesday, Oregon's death toll is a meager 240, nearly 90% are over 65 with underlying health conditions. That means that Brown shut down a $226 billion per year economy, put tens of thousands of people out of work, destroyed countless small and medium-sized businesses, and plunged the state deep into debt to save roughly 24 or 25 people under 65 with no underlying health conditions. That's not the reaction of an intelligent, responsible political leader acting in the best interests of the people. That is the reaction of someone who is either criminally insane or doing someone else's bidding. So which is it? Like many of the other mainly Democrat governors, Brown also issued a mask mandate punishable by a fine. The new executive order was neither approved by the House or by any other Democratic body. It's just Brown testing the limits of her new emergency powers. Interestingly, the mask mandate comes a full 3 months after the state reached its peak in fatalities, which means that it has less to do with controlling the infection than it does with using the virus to usurp tyrannical powers. Does that mean Brown or the other Democrat governors are closet tyrants? Probably not. But it does suggest that the people who fund Brown's campaigns and pull her strings want to know how far they can push things before the public fights back. Here's a comment by Carlo Kadoff in the Medical Anthropology Quarterly that helps to put these developments in perspective. Quote, across the world, the pandemic unleashed authoritarian longings in democratic societies, allowing governments to seize the opportunity, create states of exception. Oh, yeah. There was a German political thinker who was carrying on about states of exception, states of emergency. Carl Schmitt. It's funny that our elite, they're all Schmittians now. Anyone else find that amusing? And to push political agendas, commentators have presented the pandemic as a chance for the West to learn authoritarianism from the East. This pandemic risks teaching people to love power and call for its meticulous application. Or as I put it more briefly, they want to turn us into communist Chinese. There is a piece in the tablet by Peter Savodnik called Woke America is a Russian Novel, which is an interesting piece, no question. But oh dear, the left has gone crazy. The left has become like characters in Dostoevsky's novel Demons. And this all seems rather one-sided. And so we're going to have to bring some balance into that. We're going to talk about the mythical threat of the right wing, the extreme right wing. What, a few hundred people with tattoos on their necks? Yeah, I can see, yes. Let's see. Meanwhile, the angry right, which is most of the right, oh dear, is watching this on its screens in main streets and squares where the old statues used to stand and is horrified and scared. It seems disconnected from the same country over which it is said to exercise an overwhelming and all-pervasive racist supremacy. It knows not where to go or whom to look to. Now, you remember Sebastian Bach? He's some guy with long hair. Most famous, what was he? Skid Row was that the name of his band in the 80s? Most famous or notorious for wearing a T-shirt, this was decades ago, saying AIDS kills fags dead. Well, he's woke now. He's certainly on Team Pandemic, and he tweeted yesterday, "If you support Donald Trump, you stand against rock and roll." And every musician in America who's been put out of work because a reality TV host doesn't believe in science. Oh, it was Donald Trump that put musicians out of work. Is it? And he's got a little mask emoji there. And my response to him was, rock and roll is all about wearing a mouth diaper, locking yourself in your apartment, and cowering in fear forever. Keep on rocking, Sebastian Bach. Yeah, listen to the authorities, listen to the experts, man, because that's what rock and roll has always been about. It's always been about old man telling you what to do. And if some old man tells you what to do, then you got to do it, whatever it is. That's the spirit of rock and roll. Let's see. Toby Young, lockdown skeptics. Could this be Boris's poll tax moment? He's referring to the precipitate cause of Margaret Thatcher's disenthronement, if you will. She was tossed out because of the poll tax. Let's see, a comment from a reader. I'm feeling slightly more optimistic about the mandatory muzzle edict after having a day to digest the news. Something is telling me that as this ramshackle shit show of a government lurches from one idiosyncratic trigger-happy ruling to the next, a great fire of utter resentment for them will start to burn across our land. From bizarre quarantine orders to the locking down of Leicester to the continued assault on the high street and small businesses by this dehumanizing, rotten command to suffocate on our own exhalations as we traipse around these places. Add to that the inevitable nastiness that is already present on the likes of Twitter, but will inevitably spill out into wider society as we enter a new shaming culture perpetuated by hysterical muzzlelots. Your average punter will become very pissed off with it all very quickly, I'll bet. I feel that this will gradually precipitate a trickle of skepticism towards these oppressive measures within the general public, and the flock will start to slowly thin. People previously cowed into silence may soon find their voices. Organized boots-on-the-ground protests and crowdfunding appeals for legal challenges may suddenly see their numbers and coffers swelled, respectively. Those suffering from mental health and anxiety issues may find solace within boards like these, growing our community, growing our influence. Boris et al. Are continually poking the bear, stress testing the nation to see just what else they can take from us or force us to do in order to serve their warped new abnormal agenda. With each new diktat, with every further assault on our civil liberties, they're collectively sticking their heads into the mouth of a crocodile. It's only a matter of time before we hear a satisfying snap. Tesco, JD Sports, and Lidl have all announced they won't enforce the new edict. The police have basically said the same, beginning to look like Boris has overreached. One reader emailed me a well-crafted expression of rage. Do you know how to tell if a politician is lying? Answer: their lips move when they speak. That's probably why they love masks so much. That's a very good way to repurpose an old joke. So it turns out that a number of people are destroying their Conservative Party cards. And the burqas are optional, face masks mandatory. Piece of satire. Yeah. Boris Johnson had the right idea the first time around, and then he panicked. He's never suitable, absolutely never suitable to become a prime minister of Britain. I suppose he reached his peak when he was editor of The Spectator in a column in the Telegraph, for which I believe he was being paid something like £250,000 a year. He didn't really edit The Spectator, but he stayed out of the way of the gifted sub-editor. I believe his name was Stuart Reed, who did most of the work. And Boris would appear on television chat shows and shaking his mop of boyish hair and making that face. I'm just a bad little boy. Oh, and here are some Latin tags to, demonstrate that I went to Oxford and I'm oh so very clever. This abdication of responsibility by elected officials. Well, here's another example from my own country. Ottawa's medical officer of health is warning residents to be prepared to live with the risk of COVID-19 spreading in the community well into 2021 or even 2022. Vera Etches told Ottawa City Council Wednesday that even as new cases and hospitalizations dwindle in the region, residents must remain on guard. That means continuing to practice physical distancing and wear masks, even after Ottawa moves into stage 3 of the province's reopening plan on Friday. There are currently 58 known cases of COVID-19 in Ottawa, with 3 people in hospital. Yes, this is obviously such a crisis that it demands the suspension of civil liberties. Of the 2,167 confirmed cases since the pandemic began, 85% are considered recovered. There have been 263 deaths in Ottawa. The last one reported on, wait for it, June the 25th. Yeah, but this disease could come back at any time and much worse, much worse. So the economy needs to remain destroyed and civil liberties suspended and society smashed, because we can't afford any of these things because some medical bureaucrat called Vera Etches says so. I talked about this story yesterday. I was unaware at the time that my old friend, Michael Brendan Doherty, who is now at National Review, had written a piece about it. This week, the Times brings us a story from Methodist Hospital in San Antonio. The headline is, Texas Hospital says man 30 died after attending a COVID party. And what we get is a story with one source. The story has real didactic power in the current environment, illustrating perhaps 4 points of contention. 1, a young person. 2, in a red state. 3, believed the virus was a hoax. 4, and failed to socially distance. As a result, he's dead. The original subheadline was, I thought this was a hoax, the man told his nurse, a hospital official said. It's a morality tale, really. Don't believe it's a hoax. Whether you aren't at risk because you are young, maybe don't live in a bad red state where they aren't taking COVID seriously or go to these parties. The only thing missing was a MAGA hat and a rueful dying admission. I shouldn't have trusted Trump or my Republican governor. But as I read the story originally earlier this week, I realized the details didn't quite add up. If you believe COVID is a hoax, why would you attend a COVID party? In a pandemic for an airborne disease, aren't all parties potentially COVID parties? Chickenpox parties were aimed at spreading a local infection purposely to younger children who have milder cases. People don't hold them because they are skeptics. Something doesn't make sense. A closer look showed that not only were there no names named, but there was no date or location of the party or other sources about where and whether it happened. And then there was a curious fact that the dying man's self-incriminating final words were relayed to the press. Who gave permission for that? Yes, you see, oh no, privacy. We can't mention the man's name. Oh, really? Dead people have privacy? Also, as I mentioned yesterday, the story doesn't say that the man died of COVID-19. Yes, and the Times hedges with 2 paragraphs which were added long after publication. They also indicate where the story originated. The young junior reporter who wrote it isn't in Texas, but sitting at a desk, presumably at home. There's also an additional paragraph saying that the Times tried several times through the hospital to contact the dead man's family. Again, how would this be possible if it was, if the name of this unfortunate mythical person cannot be revealed? You might also know the entirely different subheadline, health experts have been skeptical that such parties occur, and details of this case could not be independently confirmed. In fact, the story seems to have changed several times since publication in order to salvage the Times' own credibility. A number of young journalists have been arguing lately that the traditional mission of journalism needs to be cashiered in favor of moral clarity, that journalism should be more like activism. What we have in this story is an example of where that leads us. The moral clarity was all there. It told a literal cautionary moral tale, but the reporting and editing have lacked all the traditional ethics of the trade of journalism. The result looks to me like fake news and a disgraceful attempt at memory holing the evidence. And an urban legend is what he calls it. From Zero Hedge, what a surprise. There is a mass exodus out of New York City. 400,000 people apparently have left. But I heard that 400,000 figure, 4-6 years ago? No freedom, no movement, and ridiculous rents for a shoebox apartment you couldn't even leave. Now the city says it will not allow large events until at least October. Of course, that ban won't apply to protesters and rioters. Another great reason to get out of New York City. Many people are working from home now anyway, so any work-related reason for staying in New York City has evaporated. Overall, about 5% of the New York City population has left since the coronavirus lockdowns began, and many of those were high-income earners. Manhattan housing vacancy is at a 14-year high, and new leases are down 62% from this time last year. This is a major emerging trend, and not just for New York City. Data from the real estate website Redfin does show that New York City is the #1 destination people want out of right now, but San Francisco and Los Angeles aren't far behind. Redfin also reports record numbers of people searching for real estate outside of the current metro area. They've seen an 87% increase in people searching for homes in suburbs with a population smaller than 50,000. Yeah, on the one hand, one is tempted to cheer this story, but on the other hand, these people are going to take their poisonous views with them when they leave, and they are going to contaminate whatever uncontaminated locale that they move to. just as Colorado was contaminated by California, just as New Hampshire was contaminated by Massachusetts, and just as Vermont was contaminated by the state of New York. Let's see. This is from CNBC. CDC chief says Northerners heading south for vacation may be to blame for surging coronavirus cases, not state reopenings. Yeah, you better stay where you come from, Yankee. We don't want your type around here, Yankee. If you look at the South, everything happened around June 12th to June 16th. It all simultaneously kind of popped, said Dr. Redfield, director of the CDC. We're of the view that there was something else that was the driver, maybe the Memorial Day, not weekend, but the Memorial Day week, where a lot of Northerners decided to go south for vacations. Because the South hadn't yet experienced large outbreaks like the Northeast, many southern states and cities reopened bars and gyms early and didn't require people to wear masks or to practice social distancing that seriously, Redfield said. He did not provide any data to back up his theory that Northerners traveling south are to blame for the surge in cases. Okay. I want to talk about Poland briefly. It's a big subject, but a disgusting movie has been released. It's called The Painted Bird, and it is based on a novel, a notorious novel by Jerzy Kosinski. And he was a very bad man. He was a fake man. Fake man. The Painted Bird, which is a horrific memoir of a young man in Poland during the Holocaust and that era. It's not a memoir, it's all made up. Kosinski was Jewish. He was sheltered by a Catholic family to protect him from the Nazis. The punishment for that was death, and often collective punishment. Roman Polanski was saved in exactly the same way. And in fact, that fellow who later led the Anti-Defamation League, Abe, can't remember his last name. Again, similar story. Many such cases. But he couldn't have possibly written this book because he couldn't speak English at the time. And various people have come forward to claim that they actually wrote this book. Kosinski has been accused of plagiarism again and again and again. His most famous book being There. It's accused to be a plagiarism of a 1932 bestseller in Polish. Kosinski became famous, for hiding. During parties, he'd hide behind couches or whatever, and then he'd come out from the couch. Look, it's Jerzy. Famous enough to have been mocked on SCTV. But of course, this novel was praised to the skies by reviewers. And now there's a film. It's from the Daily Beast by Nick Shager. Czech filmmaker Václav Marhul discusses his controversial Holocaust set drama, why it's less violent than Joker, and how his upcoming Joseph McCarthy movie is a rebuke of Trump. Well, he's ticking all these boxes. Let's see. The Painted Bird is a masterful epic about a young, unnamed Jewish boy, Petr Kotlar, navigating a bleak Eastern European landscape during World War II. And when it had its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival last September, it was equally praised and decried as brutal and harrowing, thanks to its horrifying scenes of murder, pedophilia, and bestiality. You see, these Polish peasants, they're savages. They're savage people. Not human, actually. It's about hope. Oh, the 60-year-old Marhul states via Skype a week before the film's July 17th video-on-demand debut. That optimistic perspective, he believes, is why, following years of struggle, he was able to secure the rights to Kosinski's acclaimed book. Apparently, it's about the three most important things in life: love, good, and hope. If Marhol's upbeat outlook on this disturbing tale is a bit surprising, so too is the fact that despite its heavily allegorical nature, rife with images of fire and smoke that recall Nazi concentration camps, the writer-director also doesn't see The Painted Bird as fundamentally a Holocaust of World War II. movie. No, it's a movie about Polish people and how terrible they are. Uh, let's be frank about this. The elite has always hated Poland. The elite did not want Poland to become a country after World War One. That the elite cheered on Trotsky's invasion of Poland, which was stopped at the miracle of the Vistula, and we're coming up to the 100th anniversary of that soon, and I will devote a lot of time to it because it is a truly providential event in human history. Lloyd George hated Poland and wanted to stop it becoming a country, and there was a particularly sinister fellow called Sir Louis Namier, who was born Ludwik Bernstein Nemirovsky in Congress, Poland. And he did his best to destroy Poland. He changed the Kherson line, the eastern border of Poland, by leaving the city of Lviv and the oil basin out. And he faked documentation of the census from eastern Galicia, single-handedly reducing the number of ethnic Poles living in the region from 2 million down to 600 to 700 inhabitants. Namier later taught at Balliol College, Oxford. He was an exceedingly influential man. And of course, to the great regret of the elite, Poland actually managed to survive World War II. Despite being crucified. But there is a school of historians that holds that the Poles were worse than the Germans during World War II. Yeah, they were worse. And this is led by a half-Jewish Polish professor called Jan Gross, who was showered with honors in the United States. Because, as I say, the elites simply hate Poles. They hate Poles, and they shouldn't exist, according to the elite. And if they're prepared to shift the blame for the Holocaust from the Germans to the Poles, they are perfectly willing to do so. What is the reason for this? As far as I can see, it's entirely ethnic animus. Entirely ethnic animus. The Poles fought bravely against Germany, and then they fought bravely in exile and in opposition, and they were crucified in 1944 with the Warsaw Uprising, while the Red Army sat on the other side of the Vistula and allowed the flower of Poland's youth to be killed. And later, of course, they imported a bunch of quislings from Moscow to lead the communists, the socialists in Poland, and then subjected Poland to further decades of humiliation and degradation. But the early leadership of the Polish Communist Party was heavily Jewish. And later, these people were purged, as tends to happen in communist countries. The old guard is purged and replaced, but this led to, how would I put it? Oh, yes, Poland is anti-Semitic. It's always been anti-Semitic. Oh, these poor communists. Well, sorry, I don't shed any tear for communists. Not now, not ever. Briefly, I'm going to go to the book club very, very soon. But I was struck by this tweet by someone called Eddie Elfenbein. In 1955, 15 million people paid to attend Major League Baseball games, while 35 million paid to attend classical music concerts. The New York Metropolitan Opera's Saturday afternoon radio broadcast drew a listenership of 15 million out of an overall population of 165 million. So what happened? What happened since 1955? Such that opera is a minority pursuit. It's a pursuit of rich people. Tickets are very expensive because opera productions, particularly at the Met, are very expensive to put on. So it costs a lot. So there's the conspicuous consumption, and also you get to, really dress up, really put on a show to let people know that you are one of life's winners. There's other things that have happened. In 1965, the Hart-Celler Immigration Act was passed, and the demographics of the United States began to change rapidly. And bluntly, the vast majority of the people who have entered the United States since 1965 have no interest in Western culture. Zero. No, newt, nada. 1955, let's see, Chuck Jones's cartoon, What's Opera Doc, which I alluded to, or which I just mentioned in my show list, is one of the most famous Warner Brothers cartoons. It's considered by many to be the best. This came out in 1957. And I'll read from Wikipedia here. I'm sure you've all seen it. The story features Elmer Fudd chasing Bugs Bunny through a parody of 19th century classical composer Richard Wagner's operas, particularly Der Ring des Nibelungen, Der Fliegende Holländer, and Tannhäuser. Yes, there's about 6 or 7 different Wagner tunes. And, the assumption was that the audience would know what these tunes were. That's all gone now. I would say that the main reason for the eclipse of culture in the United States and the West generally is what I refer to as a rise of an excess of secular democracy. Now, I mentioned Time and Newsweek yesterday. These were what you would call middlebrow outlets. They had arts sections. They weren't highbrow, they weren't lowbrow, they were middlebrow. And the assumption is that, educated people who thought themselves, to be part of the elite or aspirational or just consider themselves to be well-informed should know about art. So we're going to talk about art. And this was at a time in the 1950s into the 1960s, the early 1970s, it was a commonplace for young people, college students, to watch foreign films, to search out the latest by Ingmar Bergman or Eric Romer or whoever. But this was seen as a sin against democracy because, why should ordinary people care about, some long-haired composer's works from the 19th century? Or, I don't know, Victor Hugo or Leo Tolstoy or whatever. They have their own, vibrant proletarian culture, supposedly. And so it's been ever downward for decades. If you want culture, you're not going to find it on television. You're simply not going to find it. What A&E used to be, the Arts and Entertainment Network? And then it became the Hitler Network. Now it's serial killers and the like, or maybe people showing you how to put a new toilet in your bathroom, that sort of thing. Art is not regarded very highly anymore. Basically, art is for idiots, considered to be for idiots, and considered to be for homosexuals, because what does one gain out of art? How does one maximize one's utility? By exposure to art. We could talk about eternal verities, but our elite no longer believes in eternal verities. They no longer believe in concepts like beauty, truth, honor, etc. Who are you to say that a Haydn symphony is better than that track by Kanye that dropped last Tuesday? Who are you to say? What makes you the expert? Oh, well, there are objective standards. No, there are no objective standards. Now, again, in 1955, not all that many Americans went on to post-secondary education. And I've been hammering on this drum for some time. I'm going to continue to do so because all the evidence that I see persuades me that post-secondary education on a mass scale has made Americans stupider and more ignorant, vastly so, than they were in the past. So, quick look at the chat before I move on to the book club. The show is going to probably go about, I don't know, 5-10 minutes long. Visionary Companion says, what are we to make of Harpo Marx's bit in which he destroys a piano while playing Liszt and then extracts a harp from it? Was there some hostility at work in that routine? Oh, I don't know about that. Perhaps he saw, perhaps he saw the piano as a rival to his beloved harp. I'm told that Harpo Marx actually invented a sustaining pedal for the harp, but it never caught on. We have hip hop and twerking. Yes, the vital culture of the streets. Susan Sontag. Yes, she said that the white race was the cancer of human history. Yes, and she was a lesbian. Her late partner was Annie Leibovitz, the celebrated and debased photographer. Dwight McDonald attacked Middlebrow. Well, that was a mistake, wasn't it? Chogokin666 says they absolutely destroyed the architecture of the Met. Horrid postmodern trash now. It's offensive. KMG is slightly hot when he attempts to speak German. Well, I'll try better. Looney Tunes was highly intellectual. I don't know that it was highly intellectual. It was just that the cultural makeup of Americans, including ordinary Americans, keep in mind that these Warner Brothers cartoons were not made for children. They were made for adults. They were extra, features to be shown at movies. You get a movie and you get coming attractions. You get a travelogue. You get some cartoons. They gave you a whole bunch for your nickel in those days. But, I'll talk on Theater Thursday one of these weeks, maybe about Tex Avery and the sort of thing that one finds in his cartoon. That is to say, the jokes don't make much sense without a certain level of knowledge. And there's a famous Warner Brothers cartoon, I believe it's called Book Parade or something like this. And it's famous books from the past and the present. And there's a bunch of puns made about these books. And people come out of the books and they assume life and such like. It's very amusing, But again, the assumption is the average person who went to see movies at that time knew about these books or knew about enough of them so that they wouldn't be bored. Mike F. says Fred Siegel wrote a book about that called Revolt Against the Elites, Cultural Aspirations of Middle Class in 1950s Quashed by Elites. Well, yeah. The elites own culture now. This belongs to us. Performance art, that's not culture. Well, it is because we say that it is. How about, splattering paint on a canvas? Well, you don't understand it because you're not sophisticated enough to understand it. I have an MFA from Columbia. And if I want to tell you that Jackson Pollock is the greatest artist of the 20th century and perhaps beyond, I know whereof I speak, and you do not. Okay, Poland was sold out to Stalin. Hopper says this, and it's absolutely true. Anthony Eden went to Moscow to meet Stalin at Christmas time, 1941, and he came with a promise to promise Stalin as much of Poland as he wanted, and in the event, he took 47%. So, let's talk about today's movie. Highbrow movie? Is it? Well, I don't know. Sight and Sound lists it in its most current poll as the 7th greatest film ever made. But John Ford, the director, was rather modest. He said, he was asked his profession, he said, I make Westerns. John Ford made all sorts of other films, but I suppose he's best known for his Westerns. He is the fellow who elevated the Western from, a mere auteur to, if you will, works of art, or at the very least, serious works. John Ford, I made this point before. It's you want to talk about ethnic influence in Hollywood. Well, I'm going to make a case that the Catholicism, exceedingly powerful influence in Hollywood. I'm going to name 4 directors who are as responsible as any for what we know as Hollywood, and John Ford, Leo Carey, Frank Capra, and Alfred Hitchcock, and they were all Roman Catholics. Ford lived from 1894 to 1973. He rose to be a rear admiral in the U.S. Naval Reserve, and he was wounded at Midway. He was directing a film unit there, and he risked his life many, many times during World War II on behalf of his country. John Wayne did not, which led to something of a backlash against John Wayne, who is, of course, the star of today's movies, The Searchers. I just mentioned John Ford. He made Stagecoach and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and The Grapes of Wrath and How Green Was My Valley and The Informer, and they were expendable. He is, without question, one of the greatest filmmakers ever made. I talked on Luke Ford's the version of my Theater Thursday about his film Fort Apache, which was the first of his cavalry trilogy. This film, The Searchers, is about cowboys and Indians, or more to the point, I suppose, settlers and Indians. And despite its critical acclaim, it just keeps vaulting up the Sight and Sound list every 5 years or every 10 years. The so-called conservatives in the United States, they're horrified by this film. Absolutely horrified of this film. Why are they horrified? Because it is about activism. It's about one group against another group, and it is about revenge and retribution based on kinship. That's what it's about. You can see why it horrifies the so-called conservatives. Now, this movie stars John Wayne, and this is perhaps his greatest performance. John Wayne was the biggest movie star of the 20th century, and he was seen as the ideal American. Big, handsome, strong, likable. He's older in this film. It's not all that likable. He is, in fact, rather terrifying. That he plays a man called Ethan Edwards, who returns to the family home, or at least his brother's home, in 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War. Now, he had fought, as his brother had, on the side of the Confederacy. What had he been doing in the last 3 years? Well, he fits a lot of descriptions, says Captain Samuel Clayton, played by Ward Bond of the Texas Rangers. Perhaps he was involved in Mexican revolutionary fighting, because he comes back to his brother's home, and he has a lot of money on him. Yankee dollars and double eagle gold coins. How he made it? Well, he's not saying, and he's not the kind of character that you're going to ask how he did. Now, they are all delighted to see him, particularly the children. Now, his brother Aaron's wife seems to be particularly delighted to see him, which has led to speculation over the years that that Ethan is actually the father, the biological father of her older child, of her child Debbie. She has 3 children, and you see there's a particular closeness between Ethan and Debbie. Perhaps there's nothing to it. Perhaps there's nothing to it. I mean, the idea that that Ethan Edwards' sister-in-law is going to be attracted to him. Well, you know, most women are attracted to John Wayne, or obviously women will be attracted to a powerful and mysterious man such as Ethan Edwards. And he gives Debbie a medal that he's won. There's been a lot of research into this medal. It's not a real medal. But it's on its attachment, you know, and she's quite pleased with this. Later, we see it on another neck in quite different circumstances. That we learned there's a visual technique in this film which serves to unify it, which is from darkness to light, from light to darkness. We see openings, we see doors, caves. We see the idea of coming into an intimacy and exiting into a vast wilderness. And this, like many of John Ford's movies, was shot in Monument Valley in Utah with the spectacular mazes that you will all recognize. The settlers, the English settlers, the English-speaking settlers, are in a state of war with the native Indians. It's not a constant war, it is more of a guerrilla war. And Ethan Edwards does not like the Indians. It's not explained, but we learn that he speaks fluent Comanche, or Comanche, as he calls it. He is also well informed about their customs, their military habits, and their religious beliefs. But he hates them because they are the enemy of his people. And as if to underscore this, near the beginning of the film, we learn of a Comanche attack on Lars Jorgensen's cattle. And we find out that it's a diversionary attack, that the cattle aren't stolen, they're merely slaughtered. And so that it's a murder run. There are two possible targets. There is Jorgensen's family, and there is Edward's family. Well, it's Edward's family. And it's traditional. They kill, everyone gets killed or kidnapped. Adult men would be tortured and then murdered. Adult women would be raped, tortured, and then murdered. Boys would be tortured and murdered, whereas the young women, adolescent women, would be carried off as sexual slaves. And Ethan's, well, he's possessed at this point, that he is going to get revenge for this. And his favorite niece, or perhaps a daughter, Debbie, there is some doubt as to where she ends up. We see her, the great scene where she's gone out to hide from the Comanche, ordered by her parents. She doesn't know, she thinks she's playing a game. And we see she is kneeling before two tombstones, and we see a shadow come up. And then we see the terrifying face of the Comanche leader, Scar. And that's the last we see of her for quite some time. The homestead is ruined, and a revenge party led by the Texas Ranger captain, who is also a Protestant minister, goes off in pursuit, and Ethan is convinced that he should be leading this party. He is overruled, and they almost die as a result. They are surrounded. They continue the search, and it turns out that Ethan has found Debbie's sister's body. And the movie is very, how should I say, circumspect in its description of sexual violence. But there's no question that Debbie's sister has been raped and murdered by the Indians. And this causes a young man to go crazy, Jorgensen's son, and he goes off alone, attacking the Comanche, and of course, he dies. So that leaves Ethan Edwards and Martin Pauly. Martin Pauly is played by Jeffrey Hunter. His performance is much mocked. He's supposed to play a callow young man who is sulky and always close to tears. On that basis, based on what he is portraying, it doesn't strike me as being a bad performance at all. I will say Jeffrey Hunter was extraordinarily good looking, and as I've mentioned before, to this day in Hollywood, there's a very strong prejudice against truly beautiful women and men in Tinseltown. Martin Pauly is 1/8 Indian. And as we know, Ethan doesn't like Indians, despite the fact that Ethan was the one who saved him. One group of Indians had attacked another one, and there'd been a slaughter, and he was found as a baby, squalling in terror. And he was taken to the homestead where he was raised as their own child. Now, Jeffrey Hunter's character, Martin Pauly. As I say, he's callow and somewhat hysterical, but he's perhaps not as dumb as he seems. He can't read or write very well, but he intuits that Ethan Edwards' intentions towards Debbie Edwards are not entirely honorable, because it was the fashion at the time for white women taken in bondage like this to become the sexual slaves of several Indians, maybe passed or sold from brave to brave. And as far as Ethan is concerned, such a woman is no longer white, is barely human, and has no place in the world. And Ethan has intuited that he has to stay, Martin has intuited that he has to stay with Ethan in order to protect the woman that he regards as his sister from murder at the hands of Ethan. The movie's called The Searchers, and it's about a search that lasts for 5 years, for all 4 seasons, through the hottest days of summer, to the coldest days of winter. The location shooting in this movie is beautiful and outstanding. Many scenes shots on frozen lakes or frozen rivers, snowstorms, vast vistas. I mean, this is a widescreen film in Technicolor, and I have to salute the cinematography by Winton Hawk, which is, this is not the sort of movie that you want to watch on a small screen. Let's put it that way. It's a movie which loses an enormous amount of its appeal. It becomes difficult to understand its grandeur if you see it on a small screen. So don't do that. Now, meanwhile, there are the people back at home, the Jorgensens, who become sort of a surrogate family to Ethan Edwards and to Martin Pauly. And I really have to salute the acting of Olive Carey as Mrs. Jorgensen. She has a particularly penetrating and serious, grave look, which is most moving. But she has a beautiful daughter, Laurie, played by Vera Miles. And Vera Miles was going to become Alfred Hitchcock's new Grace Kelly after Grace Kelly retired and married royalty. But then Vera Miles got married and got pregnant, and Hitchcock essentially abandoned her, although she has a secondary role in Psycho. He was very angry at what he considered to be a betrayal by Vera Miles. But she is a beautiful woman, and Martin Pauly is a beautiful young man, and so they're a perfect couple, except that he spends 5 years searching for Debbie Edwards. And there is one thing about John Ford which irritates critics, is that there's a lot of different elements in his film. In his films, this has been described as a harrowing movie, and it is. But there's a great deal of what you might call broad comedy in it, particularly the courting, if you will, of Martin by Laurie, because she's doing all the pushing, no question about it. And I suppose the character of Mose, who is played by Hank Warden, and well, he's a half-wit. And I don't know, there's a suggestion that he's been, subjected to such harsh treatment in his life, perhaps by Indians, that it drove him mad. We see that traditional, John Ford likes to show communities, small communities. He likes to see them gathered together and, to sing hymns like Shall We Gather at the River, which appears in this. He likes to see them eating, drinking, and particularly dancing, the formal dances of the 19th century. And a lot of critics find this stuff hokey. I don't, because society was truly different then than it is now. But after 5 years, Ethan and Martin have actually reliable information as to the whereabouts of Scar, or Cicatrice, as they call him in Spanish. Now, there is another interpolation, which is rather amusing. I'm sure it would outrage people today, that the duo are they're trading with the Indians for supplies, and they find out that the Indians that they meet, they love these hats, these Western hats, like bowler hats. And there's a young woman who trades for a bowler hat, and there's some sort of miscommunication, and she follows the two as they leave the Indians, and it turns out that in her mind, and perhaps in the mind of her tribe, that she is now the wife of Martin, who is not having it, and he's quite naive about women. And he finds her attentions to be irritating, to say the least. She insists on laying down beside him after he's made it clear he wants nothing to do with her, and he pushes her, he kicks her down a hill, and Ethan laughs and says that's grounds for divorce in Texas. Ethan takes a lot of cruel fun in encouraging this belief that this young Indian woman, who they call Look, because that's the only English word she knows, that they are in fact married, but she comes to a sad end. Eventually, Debbie is located, and she is one of Scar's many wives. Scar explains that he takes a white wife for each one of his sons that is killed. And we meet Natalie Wood as the mature Debbie Edwards, and she does not want to. She does not want to return. These are my people now, she says. And it looks like Ethan is going to take this opportunity to kill her, but Martin is willing to sacrifice his own life for her. Meanwhile, there is an Indian attack, and they must flee. And later, the Texas Rangers are put together, 14 of them, to assist the U.S. Army in an attack on Scar's tribe. And we get to see the cavalry literally coming in. Ethan is indomitable to the last. Scar has been killed by Martin, who has snuck up on his tent. But that's not enough for Ethan, just as he had earlier shot out the eyes of a dead Comanche, explaining that they won't be able to live in the spirit world without their eyes. He scalps Scar, and he has his final confrontation with Debbie Edwards, which is a quite moving scene. I won't spoil it for you if you've never seen it. Ethan returns home with Martin, and he quickly leaves. And then we see the same scene pretty much when he was introduced at the beginning of the film in reverse. Again, darkness to light, light to darkness, through entrances, out of entrances. And it is clear that that for all of his love of his kin, for all of his willingness to spend 5 years of his life and risk his life many, many times to rescue Debbie, well, dead or alive, as it turns out, that he's fundamentally estranged from these people. That he's a loner. He's always truly going to be alone, and that's how the movie ends. When this movie came out in 1956, it was quite popular over time. Ethan's phrase, "That'll be the day," inspired the famous song by Buddy Holly. In 1956, Ethan's attitude, or the settlers' attitude towards the Indians, that they are our implacable enemy who seek to kill us, so we must kill them in return, and the endemic hatred on both sides, that was pretty much a mainstream American view. I've read, in recent years about all these people who claim when they were younger, these writers, that they were rooting for the Indians in The Searchers or in other such films. And I wondered what creeps they must be to side against their own people. How do they think that America became America? It came about by conquest. But people don't like to think about that anymore. I mean, the left likes to think about it, but the right certainly doesn't. It's as if, America arrived as manna from heaven. And it wasn't people, settlers, coming from thousands of miles away, making the greatest sacrifices over centuries to conquer and tame half a continent. It's rather distasteful to modern conservatives. John Ford, for his part, was very popular with the Indians, particularly the Navajo of Monument Valley, who he worked with many times, and he was very kind for them and did much for them. And the Navajo presented Ford with a ceremonial deer hide during the filming of The Searchers. It was inscribed to Ford with a second stanza adapted from a Navajo night chant. "We present this deer hide to our fellow tribesman, Natani Nez, as a token of appreciation for the generosity and friendship he has extended to us in his many activities in our valley. In your travels, may there be beauty behind you, beauty on both sides of you, and beauty ahead of you. From your friends, the Navajo of Monument Valley." And many years later, when a statue of John Ford was dedicated in his hometown of Portland, Maine in 1998, a contingent of representatives from the Navajo Nation traveled across the country to participate in the ceremony. This is from a blog called 21essays.blogspot.com, an entry called John Ford in Navajo Country. John Wayne, of course, there's an airport named after him, and there's a push to rename it because John Wayne is a very, very bad man, apparently. There's a piece by Paul Kersey in American Renaissance in February this year. "The attack on John Wayne is an attack on white America." And of course, it is. It is. That John Wayne epitomizes an America that has passed. Kersey writes, "If ever an actor epitomized the concept of manifest destiny, it was Wayne. He fought for 14 years to have the film The Alamo made, a film he directed, produced, and starred in as Davy Crockett." Donald Clark, writing in John Wayne's The Alamo, said that the movie was Wayne's idea of how being an American should be illustrated. To Wayne, The Alamo was the archetypal American story, and the actor said the film should remind the freedom-loving people of the world that not too long ago there were men and women who had the guts to stand up for the things they believed in to the point of death. Shamefully, The Alamo was neglected by MGM to the point now where, as I'm confidently assured by Robert A. Harris, that it is unsalvageable, that it cannot be restored, which is a terrible, terrible thing. There's a film reviewer, he works for National Review now. and he is called Kyle Smith. And I don't like this fellow. I don't like this fellow at all. I noted that he mocked the documentary, the acclaimed documentary about Ayrton Senna, called Senna. He seemed to think that the idea of people risking their lives in the manner that Ayrton Senna and other Formula One drivers do was somehow ridiculous. And he seems to have a problem with, how would I put it, heroism, with masculinity. And he very much dislikes the Searchers, essentially stating that it's a bad film. That let's see, I'm going to read from this piece last year. The greatest Western of all time isn't, though The Searchers is regularly hailed as the finest exemplar of its genre and one of the best movies of any kind. John Ford's 1956 film is mediocre for most of its runtime. Nearly all of the praise heaped on it stems from two elements: its closing minutes, notably its ambiguous but beautiful final shot, and the uncharacteristic brutishness of John Wayne's portrayal of the film's hero. The acclaim comes from obsessives who have seen the movie so many times they see things that simply aren't there, often motivated by a leftist loathing of American mythology that, to put it mildly, Ford and Wayne did not share. So, he says that it's mostly hokey and thinly written. Ford was primarily a painter of tableaus, and like many of his films, this one suffers from dialogue that is almost entirely flat and functional. No, I wouldn't say that at all. There are many memorable lines in this film. But our film critic from National Review here, the conservative Inc. figure, seems to be offended by the film because Ethan Edwards hasn't made enough atonement for his terrible sins. Presumably, as I say, the atavism of the us versus them. Well, in the absence of this atavism, the West would never have been conquered. Which is, again, these people with Conservatism Inc., this doesn't seem to have occurred to them, or perhaps it's shameful to them because they somehow measure themselves against the men in, say, The Searchers, and clearly, obviously, they find themselves wanting. Daniel Larison had a much better piece in the American Conservative. So liberals love a movie whose premise is the savage raid and kidnapping of a young white girl by Indians. They love a movie that valorizes family vendetta and violent frontier self-help. They love a movie where white men with guns seek to exact vengeance for the wrong done to their own. While liberals certainly have changed, do they also love Birth of a Nation? And he's responding to a piece in the American Spectator, which made the very strange argument that The Searchers is a leftist view, a mocking view of the American West. I can really only explain this confusion again by referring to the sea change in how we understand masculinity, in particular, and how we understand the idea of family, of kin, which is a word which is used many times in The Searchers. This is a fine film. I think it is one of the greatest Westerns, certainly one of the greatest Westerns I've ever seen. But it is a different kind of a Western, again, because of the nakedness of John Wayne's portrayal. There is no attempt to sugarcoat him at all. He is constantly short, rude, must have his own way, not making excuses, not justifying himself. He is in the right, and he will do whatever is necessary to get what he wants based on his code of honor, a code which we learn particularly with regard to women like Debbie, who've been taken as slaves by the Indians. it's quite clear that most of the people in this movie share his belief on this issue. I don't mean to unduly politicize this movie because it's not really a political movie at all. I just bring this up because, of course, everything is politicized now. And Scar is one of the great villains in movie history. But I don't think you could get away with that anymore. Now, John Ford worked with Indians, with real Indians. And if you see the Searchers, you will see hundreds of real Indians playing Indians. But Scar was not an Indian. Scar was played by an actor called Henry Brandon, whose name was actually Heinrich von Kleinbach. So, no, not an Indian. And he doesn't really look like any Indian that I've ever seen, but he is compelling and terrifying in this role. Should we complain that the Indians in this film are supposed to be Comanche, but they're played by Navajo? Is that acceptable now? I mean, this is how crazy this all has become. But I would urge you to watch The Searchers, and you might want to pick up Blu-ray. Blu-ray transfer looks tremendous. And it's got valuable extras. But I don't think this movie is going to be shown on streaming services for much longer, if it is indeed shown, because it offends our current mores in all manner of ways. Let's see. Final look at the chat here. The KMG show isn't politicized. I don't know. I talk about politics a lot. I wish I didn't, But as I say, as we know, everything has become politicized. Everything has become politicized. Let's see. Hard to top the Mekon's rock and roll, says Glib Medley. National Review once had John Simon as its movie critic. Now this clown. I read John Simon in National Review for many years, and he's a fine writer, exceedingly erudite man. But I got the impression that he had simply soured on film, just as a genre, that there were so many bad films that he'd just come to hate films. And this was the criticism made of his play reviews as well, by people including David Mamet. But no, it was always fun to read John Simon's reviews. Interestingly, in Woody Allen's memoir, he talks about John Simon, and he said he'd never read the reviews, but he said that he always liked John Simon and always was, friendly to John Simon. And considering how brutal John Simon's reviews of Woody Allen's movies were, that speaks well of Woody Allen, I must say. The Flame That Killed John Wayne, the Mekons have a good song. Yes, the natives were all picking fruit in the Garden of Eden when we got here, says Walrus Lawbritarian. Kevin, what do you think regarding the Searchers' influence in films like Taxi Driver, Scorsese, or Paris, Texas? Well, definitely, I'd see the influence in Taxi Driver, and Scorsese has admitted it. He's written about it. That's Travis Bickle. He is going to save a sexual slave, right? And if this involves massacre, well, so be it. That, of course, Travis Bickle attempts to talk Jodie Foster out of her bondage, but there's a similarity there between Debbie saying these are my people now, and essentially Jodie Foster's character is saying these are my people now. She has her whore friends and her pimp Harvey Keitel, who tells her that he loves her so much and how much he needs her and the like. And I don't know, she believes it. Frothing Fanboy says Natalie Wood looks like she just stepped out of a haute couture salon. Captured women did not look so tidy and healthy. They were wretched in every way. read up on the German sisters. Yes, I'm familiar with this, but there's certain conventions, all right? And this is one of them. We see two other women in this film that have been sexual slaves of the Indians, and they're insane. They're screaming, gibbering. Kyle Smith thought this scene was ridiculous. I did not find it ridiculous at all. I found it horrifying, because that's exactly what one would expect. That they were taken as sex slaves from an early age, and their children were taken away from them to be made warriors. And we see one of them clutching a corn stalk, which he has come to believe is her baby, or close enough. And this is pretty close to the edge. But I can see to someone like Kyle Smith, he would find that sort of thing ridiculous. Anyway, that's it for today. Sorry for going on a bit long. Tomorrow's the book club, and we're going to be discussing Alex Berenson's Tell Your Children, which is about marijuana. Spoiler alert, Alex Berenson does not like marijuana. So thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time and 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you like my show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already. If you would like to patronize this program with a donation, it'd be very much appreciated, especially now on July the 16th of this month. Considering my situation, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And I will leave you with this. At these times of social isolation and civilizational decline, collapse, actually, I do dearly hope that all of my dear listeners and viewers manage to forge some sort of genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.